the moment of truth. Bill McKibben is an esteemed author, environmentalist, and activist who has been sounding the alarms on climate change since publishing his first book, End of Nature, in 1989. A dozen books and over 20 years later, Mr. McKibben has gone on to found the grassroots climate campaign, 350.org, which has coordinated 15,000 rallies in 189 countries, including the most recent Go Fossil Free divestment campaign. The Boston Globe called him the nation's leading environmentalist, and Time magazine described him as the world's best green journalist. We are proud and honored to have him with us here tonight, and we would thank him for taking the time to come out with his already booked schedule. You will not meet a man more committed to a cause. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, we introduce to you Bill McKibben.
I'll hunch over just a little bit, which is good because frankly I'm a little weary, and I'm incredibly glad to be here, and so glad that Julianne Warren, my old friend, asked me to come, and that the students, especially at NYU, are doing such an amazing job of getting things together around this divestment stuff, and it's actually, I mean, and that beautiful music, and to be here in this great hall and down in you know, my favorite corner of the greatest city in the world. When I was a young talk of the town reporter for the New Yorker, one of the many sublets in which I lived was about 3 blocks from here. So I couldn't be happier. But that just reinforces the irony that my sort of role in life is to be a professional bummer-outer of people, you know. For which I apologize. And I will try to get through that part of things quickly. But I'm gonna force you through it quickly because there's no use talking about the scale and the pace of the solutions that we need to this problem unless we understand kind of the scale and the pace of the problem itself. So that's where we will start. As was said in that kind introduction, I wrote the first book about climate change for a general audience, 1989, a book called The End of Nature. So 24 years ago, i.e. before many of you were born. And the truth is, a quarter century ago, we did not understand quite how fast this was all going to happen. We knew we were in trouble. I mean, hence the cheerful title of that book, The End of Nature. But we didn't know how fast the trouble was coming, and the trouble has come very, very fast indeed. If you'd said 25 years ago that we would have burned enough carbon, raised temperature enough to melt the Arctic like we did last summer, even the most pessimistic of scientists would have said, no, that's probably not possible. In fact, some combination of 2 things was at work. One, scientists are very conservative and cautious, more prone to understatement than overstatement. And 2, it was psychologically difficult to understand what kind of change was possible because all human beings that we know about lived in this period that we call the Holocene, this 10,000 years of benign climatic stability that was the period in which civilizations arose. The most important thing that's happened in the last 25 years, the most important thing that's happened in the life of everybody in this room is that we left behind the Holocene and we moved into something else. It doesn't really have a name yet, and we don't know how far into it we're going. That's what we'll talk about a little later on. But we're into it already, and it is difficult and dangerous. Think about last summer. Think about the melt of the Arctic. Think about the fact that by the time the summer was over, there was only about 25% of the ice by volume that was there when Neil Armstrong looked down from the moon, you know. We've taken one of the largest physical features on Earth and we have broken it. And the others are following close behind. The ocean, not far from here, is 30% more acid than it was 40 years ago because the chemistry of every ocean on Earth is changing very rapidly as they absorb carbon from the atmosphere. On the surface of the Earth, the biggest thing that's going on is the changes in hydrology, the way that water moves around the Earth. If you want one fact to understand this century, it is that warm air holds more water vapor than cold, and so the atmosphere is about 5% wetter than it was 40 years ago, a staggering change in a basic physical parameter of the Earth. It loads the dice for drought and for flood. Think about the year just passed in the United States. It was the warmest year ever, and not by a little, by a lot. We have hundreds of years of weather records. If we were going to break the record for the warmest year, it should have been, it would have been unlikely to break it, but if we had, it should have been by a couple of hundredths of a degree. Instead, we smashed it by a whole full degree. Almost statistically impossible to imagine, unless you'd been paying attention, unless you'd remembered that kind of summer in March last year when it was all of a sudden 80 and then 90 degrees in the Dakotas before the end of winter, unless you'd remembered the drought that paralyzed the Midwest, cut our grain harvest so badly that the price of corn around the world went up 40%. For most people on Earth, the biggest thing that happened last year was that when they went to the market to buy cornmeal to make tortillas or whatever else, they had to find 40% more coins in order to pay for it. That's a very big deal for a lot of people. The year, of course, that saw Sandy crash up against this place. I confess that I'd been most worried as Sandy approached for my home in Vermont, because the year before the hurricane that came up the Atlantic seaboard, Hurricane Irene, had veered east and just missed New York and instead went up and dumped its cargo of water on my state and just about destroyed it. The biggest thing that ever happened there, we lost 500-mile road. We had 9 towns that were so cut off, they were having to airlift food in. So I hustled back home when Sandy was coming and then was able to watch, forced to watch on the computer as it hit New York, the most beautiful, diverse collection of human beings on the face of the planet. To watch the water pour into the IRT and the IND and the BMT was to understand the fragility of our civilization in a new way. To watch the Lower East Side turn into an extension of the East River was to understand that the boundaries that we'd set and thought were kind of permanent were not. And to understand that all the things that I've described are happening on a planet where we've raised the temperature 1 degree, and where the same scientists who told us what would happen if we did that now tell us that unless we get off coal and gas and oil very fast, much faster than any government currently plans, the temperature will rise 4 or 5 degrees this century. To understand that is to understand that we face a peril completely unlike any that human beings have ever faced. Already this is the largest thing that humans have ever done, and by a large margin. But it's going to be incomparably larger than that unless we get to work very, very fast, which is what I want to talk about tonight, getting to work. You can tell by listening to me that I'm not a sort of orator by training, you know. I'm a writer. And I didn't think that I would ever have to be an activist. Probably many of you didn't think you would ever have to be an activist, okay? My theory of how the world would change when I was 27 and wrote The End of Nature, my theory was people would read my book and then they would change. which turns out not to be precisely how it works. I mean, people actually did read it. It was like a bestseller and in 24 languages and things. But there were a lot of books, and there were a lot of scientists who went up to Capitol Hill year after year and explained that the worst thing that ever happened was happening. And a lot of economists, I see Charlie Komanoff out there, who went up year after year and explained what we needed to do, and it wasn't all that difficult to explain, you know, the sort of changes we need to make. And nothing happened. We have a perfect bipartisan 25-year record of accomplishing nothing in Washington about all this. And so at a certain point, it became clear to me that reason alone would not prevail, and instead we were going to have to, well, we're going to have to balance the scales. The problem was that the fossil fuel industry, the richest industry on Earth, was so skillful at deploying that money to subvert our democracy that nothing ever happened. They were able to prevent change. They are able to prevent change. And the more I thought about it, the more it seemed to me that we were unlikely ever to outspend the fossil fuel industry. Exxon made $45 billion last year. They made more money than any company in the history of money, okay? I'm not a theologian. I'm only a Sunday school teacher. But it's my firm belief that they have more money than God, you know, and hence on money terms we are not going to beat them. So we're going to need to find other currencies to work in, the currencies of movement, passion and spirit and creativity and numbers, and we're going to have to make those add up to enough. And so we started trying. When I say we, I mean myself and seven undergraduates at Middlebury College, where I teach, a college with a demographic profile almost exactly like NYU's, except that the people there are, you know, outdoorsy instead of hip, you know. But other than that, they, you know, the same SAT scores and whatever else. One of those original 7 colleagues, Phil Aronian, who's here someplace tonight, he's both outdoorsy and hip. In fact, in a sort of late blooming effort to become hip, they've mostly moved to Brooklyn, you know, from Vermont. But the 7 of them and me decided that we would try and form a global effort, a global climate campaign. We, you know, this was a ludicrous proposition. We had no money, we had no organization. For some reason, that didn't worry us. The only thing that worried us was how are we going to communicate with people all over the world, because they all spoke different languages. So I asked Jim Hansen, our greatest climatologist, I said, we need a number. How much carbon's too much in the air? He said, I've been wondering that myself. Let me put my team to work. In January of 2008, they published what may be the most important scientific paper of the millennia to date, and it said we know enough of carbon, enough about carbon to know how much is too much. Any value for carbon in the atmosphere greater than 350 parts per million is not compatible with the planet on which civilization developed and to which life on Earth is adapted, which is strong language for scientists to use, and stronger still when you know that wherever you are, in Manhattan or Mongolia, the atmosphere is 395 parts per million CO2 and rising 2 parts per million per year. We're already too high. That's why the Arctic melts and Colorado burns and whatever else. So that was depressing to read. But the numbers seemed to us encouraging, because though you wouldn't normally choose a wonky scientific data point as your kind of rallying cry, Arabic numerals have the great property of crossing linguistic boundaries intact, you know. 350 means the same thing wherever you are. New York, New Guinea, you're okay, you know. And so we formed this thing, 350.org, and we set out to organize the world. There were 7 undergraduates. There are 7 continents. Each one took one. The guy who took the Antarctic also had to take the internet, okay? And so off we went around the world, and we tried to find people like ourselves, and we did not know, really, if we could. There's not everywhere something called an environmentalist, but there's everywhere someone worried about hunger, about war and peace, about women's rights, about public health, about all the things you cannot have on a degrading planet. And those were our natural allies. And we started trying to round them up. And so, well, we picked this day. They said, this will be the first big day. We're going to put this number into the information bloodstream of the planet. Everybody has to do something. And so we called everybody to say, take this day, October 24th, Phil, 2009. That's the day. And we didn't know if anything would happen. We got the sense it might work. 2 days early, we were sitting around our little borrowed office in Lower Manhattan around a table, one room, and we had our laptops open doing press releases in different languages. And suddenly the phone rang, and it was the satellite phone, and it was calling from Ethiopia, and it was our leader there. Like everybody else, like me, you know, a volunteer. She was 17 years old. She said she was in tears. She said the government took away our permit for Saturday. So we're going to go ahead and do our demonstration today before they can stop us, which was brave, but that was not why she was just crying, because we so wanted to do this the same day as everybody else in the world. We don't want to spoil it for everybody else, and we wanted to be part of the big party, and we're so sorry. We're so sorry, and if this picture comes up, you'll see the picture of the, there's Phil, of the 15,000 people out in the street in Addis Ababa that she managed to assemble. Let's see if we can get it up. There we go. We're getting closer. Closer. There we go. This is why I work exclusively with people younger than myself. Okay. For the next 48 hours, these pictures just poured in from every place around the world. And they were incredibly fun to watch. I mean, U.S. troops in Afghanistan, 350 with sandbags. They send a note saying, we're parking our Humvee for the weekend and walking, okay? But 5,200 of these demonstrations that first weekend. Though CNN called it the most widespread day of political action in the planet's history. I show you these pictures only to show you what your brothers and sisters in this work look like. One of the things I had heard much of my life was that environmentalism was a kind of luxury thing for rich white people. If you had real problems, if you worried where your next meal was coming from, you wouldn't be an environmentalist. It simply turned out not to be true. Most of the people that we were working with around the world were poor and black and brown and Asian and young, because that's what most of the world is made up of. And I mean really poor. These guys did not have a digital camera. They tried to develop this in somebody's home darkroom. It didn't come out so well, so they wrote in what their banner had said. But there they were, dugout canoes on the Congo River, someplace north of Kinshasa, in, you know, where Conrad, in his Eurocentric way, had identified the heart of darkness on our planet, you know, and there they were fully at the heart of change, and, you know, beautiful, funny pictures from, you know, place after place. Huge involvement of religious community. There's the leader of Muslim South Africa, of indigenous traditions behind him, the Anglican Archbishop of South Africa. Here's our biggest evangelical college. I'd been to Bethlehem to do some organizing. People were worried because the Dead Sea has been shrinking rapidly, but it's hard to organize, you know, across all those checkpoints and things. So the Jordanians said, we'll make the big 3 on our beach. The Palestinians said, we'll do the 5. The Israelis said, we'll take care of the 0. You know, it was a good day. 300 big demonstrations across China. One got broken up by the police, but the others went on ahead. Those are our brothers and sisters in the Maldives. That's the Student Government Association, and they're holding a meeting in the lagoon to kind of illustrate a point. That's a country with a 5,000-year-old culture. The chances that it'll have a 5,100-year-old culture are slim, because the highest place in the country is about 1.5 meters above sea level. Okay? This was the lead story on Google News for about 36 hours. And I think it was because the people who were participating didn't look like what editors thought environmentalists look like, okay? There's Yemen. That's the toughest place in the world, maybe. All the women making that 0 are in full black burqa, so to us, they don't look like members of the Sierra Club or something, but their hearts are in exactly the same place, okay? They're not thinking about themselves, they're thinking about the future, about other people, about who will come after. There's the oil-rich sheikhdom of Abu Dhabi, and you can see some oil-rich sheikhs in the front. But these are smarter than your average oil tycoon. In the background, you'll see the edge of the largest solar array on planet Earth. You know? These guys are, I believe, determined to remain rich no matter what, you know, which is, if you're into that kind of thing, good, you know. There were even 400 or 500 pictures that ended up in a file called 350 Adorable, and they were adorable. Emma, that one's for you, and they were also really hard to look at. I mean, I look at the eyes of that girl in the middle often, and you know, she's going to be a refugee sometime in her life through no fault of her own, you know, unless we're able to do something about it fast here. So we've kept doing this. We've done 20,000 demonstrations in every country but North Korea, and these are what all these beautiful people look like everywhere, okay? And I could show them to you forever, and I look at them over and over again because they're a reminder of all the kind of optimism and spark and hope and dread that there is in place after place, or including the toughest places in the world. That's not like an easy place to like plant a tree, you know, and think, well, that's going to be okay. But they're working it. And this has been good work. We've raised kind of climate consciousness in all kinds of places where it never was before, and we've done the biggest art projects in the history of the world. Some of you may know Tom York from Radiohead. Those are 3,000 of his closest friends in blue raincoats, and they're making an image of King Canute trying to hold back the rise of the seas there on Brighton Beach. This one day of art projects we did around the world were so big, those are thousands of people in the DR, that we needed to borrow about $500,000 worth of satellite time to actually even get a sense, you know, be able to take pictures of these things. That's 3,000 or 4,000 people in a dry riverbed in Santa Fe, putting blue sheets above their heads as the satellite flew over to bring the river temporarily back to life. You know? So this kind of stuff's beautiful. And I really could show you these all day and all night. At a certain point, one has to go beyond education to action, to trying to take those movements and make them do things, and that's been the work of the last few years. I'll tell you just really quickly the story of this fight against the Keystone Pipeline. 18 months ago, Jim Hansen at 110th Street, our greatest climatologist at Columbia, he said, look, you might want to take a look at those tar sands up in Canada. They're the second biggest pool of carbon on Earth. If we burned everything off there tonight, just overnight, the atmospheric concentration of CO2 would rise from 390 parts per million to 540 parts per million, okay? It's a lot of carbon up there. And they're planning to build a pipeline. And indeed, they were planning to build a pipeline. And the only people really protesting it were our brothers and sisters in the indigenous movement, because their land had been wrecked already and was being wrecked day after day by this mining. And so we asked them, can we join in this fight? And they said yes. And our way of joining in was, since no one knew about this pipeline, was to use the publicity power of nonviolent civil disobedience. And we brought the largest civil disobedience action in 30 years in this country, in Washington, D.C., the summer before last. 1,253 people arrested. And I think there's people in this room who joined in that fight, and we are so grateful for it. And it was good, and it spread around the world, you know, to Canada and then to consulates and embassies. And then we followed the president around the country very politely. People would greet him and chant, yes, we can, stop the pipeline, you know. And then we went back to the White House and we circled it with human beings, 5 deep all around the White House on a gorgeous day. And 4 days later, the president said, okay, let's stop this thing for a year and review it and pay careful attention. And so that year is up. And that Review is back underway and the political process in full steam, which is why a week from Sunday we need you, if you can get there, to be in Washington for what will be the biggest climate rally in the country's history. We're hoping 20,000 people or more on the Mall, there to show the president that nobody's forgotten about this pipeline, that it's the moment, the kind of litmus test, the way to figure out if he's serious, if anyone's serious about leaving some carbon in the ground. So if you can join us, that'd be a good thing. We've stopped it for 15 months, which at 900,000 barrels a day means we're close on to 400 million barrels of oil that we've kept in the ground, which is not bad. It's not going to stop global warming, but it was definitely worth a few days in the central cell block in DC, you know. But one of the things we learned from that fight, which really goes to the other reason, the biggest reason we're here tonight, is that we're not going to win this battle against global warming one pipeline at a time. It's really important to play defense because we can lose it forever if they build a few of these things. But to win it, we're going to have to go on offense. There's too many pipelines and too many coal mines and too many oil wells to just fight them one by one by one. We're also going to have to take on the industry straight ahead and try to weaken its political power, its ability to prevent action on common sense things like a price on carbon year after year after year. Hence, this campaign about divestment. I wrote a piece last summer for Rolling Stone. For those of you who keep your back issues, it was the issue with Justin Bieber in a t-shirt on the cover, okay? Here was the weird thing. Like a couple of days later, the editor called me up and said, "This is strange, but your piece has 10 times as many likes on Facebook as Justin Bieber's." And now, partly that is no doubt attributable to my soulful stare, you know. But mostly it's because it just laid out the math in a new way, new for me and pretty much new for everybody else. It had 3 numbers in it that have become the kind of touchstone for trying to understand our predicament. The first is 2 degrees. That's how much the world's governments, it's the only thing they ever agreed on climate change, is that 2 degrees would be too much. That's the one red line they drew at that failed summit in Copenhagen, at the G8, G20, 2 degrees. 2 degrees is actually way too much. If 1 degree melts the Arctic, we're fools to find out what 2 degrees will do, but we're going to find out. That's about, even if we do everything right, that's about where we manage to halt things, okay? And so it's the number we have to work with. Second number, 565 gigatons of carbon, 565 billion tons. That's what the scientists tell us we could burn between now and 2050 and have some hope of remaining below 2 degrees. It is the limit, okay? If 2 degrees is the 0.08 blood alcohol level at which the state police will pull you over and give you a ticket, then the 565 gigatons is the 3 or 4 beers you might get away with in drinking in the course of the evening, okay? The third number was the new and important one. It came from a bunch of financial analysts in the UK who had done the work of going through SEC filings and annual reports and adding them up and figuring out that the fossil fuel industry already had in its reserves 2,795 gigatons of carbon, 5 times that much. They have a case of beer ready open for us to drink tonight, and maybe 2 cases. That was really, really scary to read. Because when you read it, if you thought about it, you realized that the end of this story was written. I mean, that stuff's below ground physically, but it's above ground economically. That's what the share price of Exxon is based on. When Peabody Coal borrows money, that's their collateral. It's going to be burned. The end of this story is written. There is no room for speculation or doubt or wishful thinking unless we quickly and powerfully rewrite it, all right? Unless we change that balance of power. When you knew those numbers, you knew something new about the fossil fuel industry. It wasn't an industry whose business plan had a flaw in it. Its business plan was the flaw, you know. It was a rogue industry. It was outlaw, not against the laws of the state, they get to write those, but outlaw against the laws of physics, okay? There's no way, if they carry out their business plan, that the planet does not tank. And so we have to figure out how to rein them in. And that's what this divestment stuff has been about. And this divestment stuff, I am happy to say, has exploded very, very quickly. We went on tour the night after the election, this Do the Math tour, and we did it across the country, 24 cities in 26 nights or something like that. We had a bus. We had Johnny Cash's old bus driver. We rode around America, you know, biodiesel bus. It was great. And big sold-out concert halls every night and things. And the really good part was, when we started, there were 10 or 15 campuses that had active divestment movements. And now there are 234, okay? The nation said last week that this was the largest student movement in several decades, and it's come out of nowhere in a matter of weeks, and it is growing strong. 4 o'clock this afternoon, Sterling College in Maine became the 3rd college in the nation to divest its fossil fuel stock. Okay? The city of Seattle already has decided to divest it. Today, the Board of Supervisors in San Francisco introduced an ordinance there that would do the same thing. It's on the move, and it's powerful to watch it, place after place after place. Of course, it's going to be really hard most places because, you know, boards of trustees are made up of Wall Street guys, and it's all, you know, whatever. But there's a lot of reasons to think that we're going to start making some real progress, that we're going to at least be able to make this argument profoundly and loudly. One of the reasons is that every campus around, including NYU, including Columbia, including Cooper Union, including all the other campuses that are here tonight, they've spent a lot of time bragging in the last 5 or 10 years about how committed they are to sustainability and how green they're going to be. And they have sustainability coordinators and sustainability departments, and they have things on the website about the new energy efficient building. That's great. It's really good. That's what we should do. And there's no logical reason that you would green the dining hall but not the portfolio, that you'd care about the field house but not the endowment. These are all part, you just want to green them too. Consistency, intellectual consistency, which after all is one of the things that colleges and universities prize, demands that one take this on, you know. There's another reason, I think, why it's going to be really, really powerful. And that is that almost no place more than colleges are you able to raise this issue, the most central and profound moral issue that climate change brings to the fore, of intergenerational morality, equity. I was sitting around with the Board of Trustees a couple of days ago, and I said to them, you guys are all look like me, or some of you older. We've got another 20 years on this planet, okay? Maybe, you know, we're well-off first worlders. We'll probably make it through okay. Maybe we'll have a few more Sandys and, you know, so on and so forth. But probably we'll check out in time. If you're an undergraduate, a typical undergraduate at a U.S. college or university, and you look at those charts with the escalating temperature curves and the escalating sea level rise, and you're 20 right now, you got 60 or 70 years left on this planet, you are completely screwed unless you figure out how to put an end to this now. And so it is imperative in this case to say to the Board of Trustees or whoever it is, you guys got to listen to us now. Okay? Got to listen to us, because it's us that's on the line, not you. And if you want, and you do want, because there you are volunteering at the Board of Trustees to make our lives okay, you cannot pay for our education by investing in things that guarantee we won't have a planet to carry out that education on. It's going to be a powerful, powerful movement. It's not going to bankrupt Exxon. We can't do that. But it is going to take away some of their political power. It's going to rob them of some of that veneer of respectability. It's going to revoke some of that social license. It's going to make it harder for them to do the things that they do. Think about, say, the tobacco industry. There are people in this room, I see a couple my age, who are old enough to remember when, like, Philip Morris was a respectable company, you know. And when you walk in the hall, when you walked into a hall like this, you saw a cloud of cigarette smoke, you know. That changed because people did that work, and now we will do this work. And the reason we'll do it is not just for ourselves, we'll do it for people all over the world. We did this day of action around the planet last spring called Connect the Dots, and we asked people to rally in places that had already felt the sting of climate change, and we are used to these big events, but this one just, the pictures flooded in from everywhere. The coral reefs of the Marshall Islands decaying in this hot ocean. You would think in Afghanistan they had other things to worry about, you know, but the fact that the Kabul River is drying up is pretty basic. Drought in Kenya, sea level rise in Auckland. Some places their worries a little less, you know, absolutely life and death, but you know what? You should be able to ski in Aspen, you know. Place after place, wildfire across the boreal north and sea level rise. That top red balloon, that's where the level of the Dead Sea was 40 years ago, you know. That picture from India came with a note that just said there is no water behind our dam anymore, you know. That's from the part of Pakistan where 20 million people were displaced by flooding in September of 2010, when the largest rainstorms that ever happened in Pakistan fell up there in the Hindu Kush, up in the mountains. 20 million people. I mean, think about if Sandy had come and displaced everybody in the New York metropolitan area, it wouldn't have been 20 million people. I mean, just try to imagine. And then remember that none of them had a damn thing to do with causing the problem that we face. There's my beautiful Vermont, but places like it all over the world. Of all the pictures that came in, that may have been the one that hit me the hardest, of maybe the smallest demonstration. It's just some kids in a dirty street turned river in Haiti. But those signs that your actions affect me. And they do. You know, more people died in Haiti from Hurricane Sandy than died in New York. All right? And there's still a cholera outbreak underway there in its wake. All right? Your actions affect me, but not the other way around. There's nothing they can do, save appeal to our sympathy, to change the outcome of this story. They can't burn less fossil fuel because they don't burn any now. They don't have the, you know, the White House a half day's travel away to go rally outside. They don't have the headquarters of the largest fossil fuel companies on earth. They can't divest anything because they don't own anything. All right? That's us. We have some of that power, and we have got to put it to use, and we will put it to use. Let me just finish by telling you two stories from those arrests in Washington that stick in my mind because they seem apropos a little bit. One has to do with these questions of across the generations. When I wrote the letter asking people to come get arrested, which by the way is a hard kind of letter to write, I must say, but when I did, one of the things I said was, I mean, I wrote it, a lot of my friends signed on it too, Naomi Klein and Wendell Berry and people, but one of the things we said was, we don't think college kids should have to be the cannon fodder here. If you're 21 right now, an arrest record might not be the absolute best thing in our economy. It's perfectly fine to go like occupy the dean's office. That's not going to get you in any huge trouble. But one of the few unmixed blessings of growing older is, past a certain point, what the hell are they going to do to you, And so it was very good to see a lot of people with hairlines like mine arriving in D.C. for this action. We did not ask people, how old are you, as they were getting arrested. That would be rude. But we very cleverly said, who was president when you were born? Okay? And the two biggest cohorts had come from the FDR and the Truman administration. All right? So that was, on the last day, there was a guy arrested with a sign around his neck that said, World War II vet, handle with care. Okay? He was old enough that he'd been arrested, he'd been born in the Warren Harding administration. Now, I was a history major, and I confess I'd forgotten there was a Warren Harding administration. Okay? The only point I'm trying to make, young people, is that your elders are starting to act like elders, and that's good. Very good, and we need that to continue. We need it to continue on campus. We need alumni and staff and faculty involved. If there is anybody in this room who happens to have tenure, this goes triple for you, okay? This is what tenure was designed for. There's nothing they can do to you, okay? So, help. Second thing we said, and I think this might apply here in a certain way too, we said, if you want to come get arrested, would you wear a necktie or a dress, okay? I live in Vermont. This is as dressed up. Basically, we just, swaddle ourselves in fleece and make it through the winter, okay? We don't really dress up a lot. But we wanted to make a point, and it's the same point I've been trying to make all night, sort of underneath everything. And that point is, there's nothing at all radical about what we're talking about. Nothing. All we're asking for is a planet that works the way the one we were born onto worked. All we're asking for is a planet that works the way that everybody born in the 10,000 years for which we have any history of human beings, how that planet worked. That's not a radical demand. If you think about it, that's a conservative demand, okay? Radicals work at oil companies. If you are willing to get up in the morning and make a fortune by altering the chemical composition of the atmosphere, once the world scientists have told you the dangers it represents, and once you've watched things happen like the melt of the Arctic, then you are engaged in a far more radical act than any human being that ever came before you. And our job is to check that radicalism quickly before it overwhelms every good thing on this earth. I'm not certain it can be done. There are scientists who think we've waited too long to get started, and there are political scientists who think there's too much money piled up. And I don't know. It's possible that they're right. If you're a betting person, that might be the smart bet to make. But given the stakes, you're not allowed to make that bet, not morally. Our job is to figure out how to change the odds of that wager in as big a way as we can, with no guarantee that we will win in the end or not. And we can change those odds, and we can change them substantially, but only if we do substantial things. It's not going to happen alone, one light bulb at a time. It's going to happen systemically and structurally, which means building movements that take on the powerful forces that are causing the problem. And that's why I'm so grateful that you're doing that. And all I really wanted to do tonight was show you those pictures of who your brothers and sisters in this fight are, okay? Because I cannot guarantee you we're going to win, but I can guarantee you that everywhere around the world now there are people ready to fight, because I've met them and seen them and been with them, and it's always an honor to be in those rooms with them, and it is such an honor to be in this room with you all. And I don't know if we're going to win, but I know we're going to fight, and I know it is just an incredible privilege to get to do it shoulder to shoulder with you all and find out how it comes out. So thank you all very much.
Now we will